Hello and welcome again to Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin, back after a week in the Monster Pit, here with superhero Teos Abadia. Hey, Teos.
Hey, Shawn. I see, folks don't get to see the video like I do, but that's an impressive amount of monster gore that you are drenched in.
Oh, it is. It tastes good, too. It tastes,
That's excellent.
Yeah, it's got a cooling effect, which we all need.
Cooling, yeah. Do you know how hot this show is?
How hot is this show?
This show is so hot. I had to take a cold shower before we recorded.
Yeah, not to mention the 115-degree weather you're trying to survive without air conditioning.
Yeah, it is. It is a little bit of the climate change has come to visit Portland with highs that are like 5 degrees above the record previously, and maybe more today. So we'll see. It is hot. It is very, very hot. It's so hot I might not wear pants. We'll see.
Yeah, I was going to whine about the 90-degree weather we're getting here in Western New York, but I really shouldn't when other people are 15 or 20 degrees warmer.
Yeah, I'm googling things like how to keep chickens alive, and it's really interesting. It's a whole nother scale once you get it's not 101, it's 112. It's temperatures that belong in weird areas with names like Death Valley, right. Or Arizona, if you've heard of that mythic place.
Right. Or Florida.
Yeah.
Those strange exotic lands.
King of humidity. That's I believe, their state motto.
It's true. It's true. And I wanted to thank Jim Davis for coming on and helping out last week. I actually listened to the podcast. You guys did a great job. I was wondering, what the heck am I doing there? I should just hand things over.
Same thing. I mean, it might just be Jim's show from now on.
Okay, sounds good. But if you missed last week's, go back and give it a listen, because Jim Davis did a great job. And now we are going to step into that land we know as D&D Gaming News. So we heard about the first D&D live stream game, which included the likes of Jack Black and Jay and Silent Bob, and all sorts of celebrities. And the second stream has been announced. This stream is all WWE all the time, featuring Ember Moon, Xavier Woods, Mace, Tyler Breeze as players, and the DM, none other than Abria, I can't say this, Iyengar?
I think it's Iyengar.
Okay.
But I have not watched. She just had the first Critical Role show of the summer, and it was apparently amazing. And so it's on my to-watch list. So they're calling it, the summer of Iyengar, and I think it is for good reason.
Yeah.
It's apparently really good DMing skills.
Yep, straight from the Critical Role show over to the D&D live stream with the WWE All-Star Celebrities. So there you go. That will be July 16th and 17th on D&D Live, which you can watch via the G4 network, the WotC channels, or on the Peacock.
Wow. Mind-blowing.
Good times. We have talked in previous shows about the Strixhaven Unearthed Arcana subclasses, and Jim and Teos did a live or walkthrough of it last week. The survey is up, so now you too can leave your mark on the future by going and taking that survey and letting everyone know what you think about the subclasses. Anything to add there, Teos?
We might talk about this later, but I have hit a little bit of a wall in subclasses. I feel like we have a good number now in the game. I don't, but maybe I'm wrong. In that maybe subclasses are maybe they're supposed to be n+1 number of them, like an ever-increasing, ratcheting upwards number of them, and you're not supposed to know them. They're not maybe supposed to be iconic. Maybe they're just supposed to be like the way you characterize your character, like anything else.
Yeah.
Because there are so many of them now.
Right. It's that disparity between these rules elements as mechanical rules and these rules elements as ways to build a cool character. And you can never have too much flavor.
Right.
But you can have too much rules.
Yeah.
And, so you come up with a good idea, but putting mechanics with those cool, flavorful, fun ideas get harder and harder and harder to do.
Yeah. And I love the concept of Strixhaven. So this is not, please don't, anyone listening, don't think that what I'm saying is these are terrible subclasses. No, there were things I liked and didn't like about them when I try to be like a critical analyst of the design work in them. Mm-hmm. But it just, and I love the Strixhaven concept of being a member of one of these schools. And I think a subclass is a good way to do that. It's just that it hits me the enormity of how many subclasses the game now has. Mm-hmm. And I'm used to, I think in my mind, subclasses were always like on a more iconic type thing. And there was a time when my brain tried to memorize the names of every subclass because that was like a type of character.
Right.
And I think that's becoming impossible.
Yep.
It has been for some time.
I think you're right. And I think we will talk a little bit about it as we get into our regular segment where we talk about the character options from Ravenloft.
Mm-hmm.
All right. A new 5e set of adventures are going to be released that are based on Magic the Gathering. So let me try to run this down, and Teos, you catch me if I'm wrong here. There will be 5 different adventures coming. The first one will be the week of June 29th, so coming up shortly. Magic the Gathering always gives fiction and lore to go along with their new sets.
Yep.
So it makes it gives you a patina of story over the games that you play. And in this set, these adventures are going to replace those stories.
That seems to be what Wizards is indicating, is that instead of trying to just give us fiction, they're going to give us adventures that will slowly introduce things, which is really cool if that's going to be like on the Wizards Magic the Gathering website to like tell people to download adventures that are Magic players. Like that could be some cool crossover.
Yeah.
And, we're all going to the same website. That's a neat crossover.
Yep. Getting eyes in new places. That's the marketing motto, and that's one way to do it. So it sounds like these adventures will be free and run about 15 to 20 pages each. And these scenarios are designed for characters from levels 8 to 10. So it's not a beginner's thing. It's something that you're going to want to be at least steeped in the rules a bit and be ready and willing to run or play those higher level adventures.
And that's a little strange, right? Like,
yeah.
Why high level?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Huh. It's
okay.
I mean, I could think of a few reasons why you might want to, just in terms of the content. But for people who are always thinking about on-ramps and new avenues of marketing, it would make more sense to go like 1 to 3. But
right.
We'll see, and maybe there's a good reason for. You can get more story and a little bit more threat, I think, out of an 8 to 10 adventure. So
you also 8 to 10 allows you to hit the CRs of monsters that may be depicted in the art of the Magic the Gathering cards as well, right? Things like beholders. When you stop and look at like some of the really famous things, they tend to be in this higher level range, and you can encounter them as solo monsters when you get your character levels high enough. So it might be that.
Yep. Do you want to talk about the cards that have been revealed?
Yeah, so we heard and reported on this a few weeks back that there was a mechanic that was go to the dungeon. Some of the cards would say things like when you've gone to a dungeon or completed a dungeon. So everybody started going, oh, what's this? Because that doesn't exist in Magic the Gathering. So everybody smelled some new mechanic coming in. And indeed, the mechanic has been broken down a fair bit in a YouTube video and blog post that's on the Wizards of the Coast Magic the Gathering site. That there are going to be these cards called dungeon cards, and they don't go into your normal deck of cards. You have them out in the game sort of as if it was your sideboard, but they also don't count against your sideboard. They're just sort of out there. And when a card allows you to go to a dungeon, you then choose one of them and you go to it. And it looks physically kind of like a set of rooms, all one after linked to the next. But it's also like a flow chart. So you start at the top, and you must complete that by doing a thing, whatever that thing is that it says on the dungeon card, and then you can weave through the iterative layers of the dungeon. And sometimes there'll be choices. You can go left or right. You can't double back, so you just did the left branch, for example, of the dungeon, and you get through to the end. And the dungeons are Lost Mine of Phandelver, Tomb of Annihilation, and Dungeon of the Mad Mage. And so it gives you that evocative feel of a dungeon crawl as you go through. It unlocks benefits for doing the completing the dungeon, and other cards feed off of them, either letting you go to them or rewarding you for completing them. So they showed like a card that it can attack twice because you've completed a dungeon.
Oh, man.
So I think that's pretty neat. They've shown pictures of all kinds of art, all kinds of dungeons, and most importantly, Shawn, as you know, they showed art of a flump card that's a rare. So, I mean, I'm buying this.
So there you go. It is now the best game ever.
Best game ever.
Retroactively, the Magic is the best game ever because there is now a flump card.
It's true. It's
officially
true.
in Magic. Yep.
It has elevated itself.
And WotC was clear that even though this set is coming out, the canon of D&D and the canon of Magic the Gathering will remain separate, except for these crossovers that are happening now.
Yeah, it's interesting that they're thought of as separate universes, which flies a little bit in the face of, say, like the Penny Arcade Acquisitions Incorporated Jeremy Crawford thing, where they went to Ravnica from Waterdeep, and obviously you can take your characters to Ravnica and Theros and things like that. And I guess Theros is a little more meant to be make a character here rather than travel there. But it's I find that kind of interesting that they want to keep the canon separate, and that's probably good. I mean, I think if you started to take Temple of Elemental Evil and say that there is a planeswalker there behind it all, like that would. Yeah, that's not chocolate and peanut butter. That's kind of messing with stuff. And so I think that's probably a good call.
Yeah, chocolate and gravel.
Yes.
So, WizKids is releasing a new D&D tabletop game. And I read that and went, huh.
Yeah.
And it's called Dungeon Scrawlers, Heroes of Undermountain. And I went, double, huh. But I did not read any further. So let me know what this is all about, Teos.
It is hard to figure out exactly what it is, but I think it's some sort of a game where you get a sort of wet erase type dungeon board and you sort of draw on it. Like there's some things that when you draw on them or when you wet them, they like show things.
Okay, yeah.
I think it's one of those types of things. That it's a kind of they're a genre of these things for kids, and so I think that as you're drawing on it with your pen, you're not allowed to lift. You're sort of exploring. And you might hit monsters or treasure or whatever. And I think your class is determining how good or bad that is for you, I think what's going on. And then eventually you weave your way through this maze-like dungeon and you draw the boss. And I don't know if everybody has to get to the boss or one person triggers the boss. But when you reach the boss, then you reach the end and you can see who got the most points. And it was a little bit weird because on one hand, this article was really sort of saying like, oh, it's an intro to D&D. And whenever any details I read, I'm like, this isn't D&D at all. But, okay, maybe it's not a way to learn D&D, but I guess the way with young kids, you could have fun and reinforce dungeons are neat, being a rogue is neat, that sort of thing. Yeah. And it's $25 and you get 10 maps, but I don't know how long that lasts. And so we'll have to see more of what this game is like, but it's clearly branded. It has Heroes of Undermountain as the title. So
yeah, awesome. Teos put this in the show notes, not me, but I will read it. Ghostfire Gaming has a design blog. It is true. At Ghostfire, we have Ghostfired up a design blog where we go into details on the way we do things at Ghostfire Gaming. And so some of it has to do with like Kickstarter fulfillment and our products folks talking about how they make things. And when my turn came around to write the blog, I decided to talk about monsters because by golly, we did a Kickstarter for that. And I'm in the middle of doing a lot of design review and editing and all sorts of coordination on the book. So I talked about the book, what's going to be in it, some of the people who've worked on it, and sort of the process that we went through for making a good monster.
Yeah, I liked how you broke down the processes and you sort of compared it to a machine with inputs and outcomes, both mechanical and narrative. Mm-hmm. And you talked about how monsters are sort of in this interesting design space that has functional responsibility because you have to do, they sort of have mechanical constructs, right? Hit points, attack bonuses that are the meat of the mechanical interaction in the game. But they are also dramatic hurdles. They're tension. They tell a story. They allow characters to tell their story. I thought that was really neat how you broke that down.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, this is what my brain does when I can't sleep at night. It, imagines all these different scenarios of how to describe what we do. This thing we do called game design. So, yeah, you can give it a check at ghostfiregaming.com. And if you go to the blog, it's called Rumblings from the Word Mines.
Yeah, that was excellent. Recommended. Thanks. And Ghostfire is not just relaxing, right? It doesn't seem like it's vacation over there.
No, I complain about how hard I work, but everybody at Ghostfire is working hard because we have a program called Forged with Ghostfire. So we partner with other content developers to help them bring their projects to life. And one of the projects was just lifed. Literally 3.5 hours ago, a Kickstarter called Dungeons of Drakkenheim went live. It is a setting and an adventure written by a pair of gentlemen called the Dungeon Dudes. They do a great stream where they give advice and reviews and sort of talk through, teach D&D. I've heard many people say, "Oh yeah, I learned D&D by watching the Dungeon Dudes." And not only do they do this show with news and reviews and design ideas and things like that, they also do a live stream show. And their show is set in this city called Drakkenheim. And so what they've done is taken this setting that they created and that they play their game in and made it so everyone can play there. Drakkenheim is a city that was struck by meteors. And so in the game, you can explore this now ruined city where there are many factions that are vying for power. So you can ally with certain factions, but if you do, you're going to be instantly the foes of different factions. So you can play factions against each other. The meteors brought magic, but it's uncontrollable magic. So you can use the magic that the meteors brought, but it's also a corrupting power. So you have to be very careful to use it too much because you could become corrupted by it. The Kickstarter went live, like I said, 3 hours ago, and it's now at $225,000.
Wow.
With almost 2,000 backers. So I think it's going to be okay. I think it's going to make it.
I'm going to right now challenge this Forged by Ghostfire program to fund my paper bag adventure, where everyone will get one paper bag, and you must make an adventure out of it. That's a kit, and I'd like to see how high we can fund this. I'm pretty sure we can go pretty high.
I think so. So you do have a month to back this, but if you get in on the first 48 hours, you do get an extra bonus. So you can go check that out.
That sounds great.
Yeah. Origins registration has opened, even if their policies are a bit unclear. You want to take this one, Teos?
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion recently around conventions that are trying to reopen as we get closer to those dates, and they have to announce their policies or not. And a big part of the question is, well, do you have to be vaccinated to attend? And Gamma has opened the registration, and kind of the big things they're saying is, hey, children can come free. Thursday is free. And I guess we're still under the original guidelines, which are that masks are required, but none of the latest updates mention these standards. So it's a bit of a guessing game and a little interesting because, of course, children under 12 cannot get vaccinated. So they cannot be protected from the virus at this time. And of course, getting a mask on a kid is the hardest person to get a mask on.
Yeah.
Mostly.
Yeah.
And so it brings to mind, it raises all these questions about what these organizations should do. While of course we acknowledge that they're in a very tough situation financially, there is that question of what is the right policy to do and what should it look like. And of course, some people, there are very, very small number of people that cannot get vaccines for health reasons. But what is the answer? Should nobody go to these conventions? Should we require vaccines? Should we? Yeah. So it's creating some of that discussion here.
Yep.
And the same is true.
Yeah. I was going to say, speaking of PAX West.
Yeah, the same is true around PAX West, where that is September 3rd to 6th, and they've opened for panel submissions, and we are told face masks are required, and there's going to be temperature screening, reduced occupancy, which is probably going to happen on its own anyway. But again, no vaccines are required, so some folks are saying, I don't know that I can go to PAX West because that maybe not contributing to a safe environment. And PAX is famous because we've seen it erupt before with communicable diseases. And even if it's cold, it can go through and just tear into people to the point where we would laugh about if you go to PAX, you have to say hi with a fist bump or, elbow bump or just nod. Because the PAX plague was sort of a thing that we would talk about, and now we're in an actual plague. It is something to consider. So we'll see what happens. There is still PAX Online July 15th to 18th, as we reported last week. Free badges for that, paid badges if you want some extra swag benefits. So there are always options. Origins, I think, still has Origins online. So there are ways to attend. And there are conventions like Gamehole Con that are requiring vaccines where that everybody there will need to get the vaccine. And then if the local mandate is no masks, at least everybody around you is vaccinated, so the risks are much lower.
True. And we'll have more about conventions as they come online or go offline again in the coming months.
And Shawn, that's kind of the end of our news, but I wanted to quickly speak to something that's been going on. And you and I, we know that words have power, and that's why we don't run around saying a Sararak all day long, because sometimes to name evil is to summon it. But there's been a whole thing going on this last week or so with the reemergence of an entity and a lot of ugliness around it. And so I don't think we want to name it or go into it in any great depth, except to say that my recommendation to folks, when you see things like that are attacks on our industry, its diversity, its strength, its recent growth, that's an opportunity for all of us to think hard on that, learn from those discussions, listen to others who are affected, and then take some kind of action that you feel comfortable with to ensure that our industry keeps on improving and keeps on becoming more diverse, more of a safe place for everybody. I don't know if you want to say anything, Shawn.
Yeah, no, the day before all of this broke out, before the train wreck began, I posted on Twitter, and I was just thinking randomly, it's great how much this hobby has grown in not just the number of people playing, but in the types of people playing. And just the diversity and not just of the people, but of ways that you can enjoy the hobby, whether it's streaming, watching streams, doing crafts, creating recipes for cookbooks that are gaming themed. All of this stuff is becoming more prevalent, more accepted, and loved by more people. And so I just posted that on Twitter saying this was great. And the next day, the tweet that you're talking about, or the interview that you're talking about, came out, and I was like, well, that was quick. That was a very short-lived moment of everyone coming together in the community. So I agree with Teos. That's all I could say.
And politics will always be in our game. And I think one thing that happens when we look back through the lens of nostalgia is we might incorrectly say there didn't used to be politics in our game, but it's because things were so same and so stated from one perspective that it appeared to be non-political.
Right.
But it actually was, right? Because all those voices were being drowned out and kept to a single voice and a single theme and a single message. And our game has gotten nothing but stronger and better as it has. You cannot look at you cannot look at the old days of D&D in any way and say that they were stronger then. The games are not better written. There wasn't a better understanding of mechanics or rules or storytelling or anything like that. You might have a preference in style, or, and I might, and you might, and whatever. The next person has a particular preference. That's all well and good. Mm-hmm. But just objectively looking at how things were created or written or published, or the reach they had, or any of that, really the only case in which old D&D had an advantage was that, as I've said, it did manage to create branded baloney. Mm-hmm. And that is the heights to which this game has never managed to reach. Yeah. But outside of branded baloney, I mean, everything about RPGs these days is better.
I think we're getting some branded baloney on that, but a different kind. Yeah. Just to sum up what Teos is talking about, if you think that politics is not involved in everything you do, it is only because the politics of the situation are politics that you agree with, so you don't see any problem with it. There's politics in everything, because politics is more than just politicians. It's about power. It's about power balance. Politics is a term that means a lot of different things. So just because a certain topic has come into the game does not mean that it's any more political of a game than it was back then.
Yep.
So there you go. Now, with no further ado, we can get into Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. And since we are rebels, since we know no bounds, we didn't start with Chapter 1. No. We just went right to Chapter 4, did a review of the adventure House of Lament, and now we're going to start with Chapter 1, where we talk about character creation. Just to preface all of this that we're about to talk about, I want to remind people that when we look at these things, we're looking at them through our own personal lenses of preference, of thoughts on game design. So if we sound like we're being overly critical, I promise you it's not any more critical than we are of our own writing. I will say much worse about my own work than I will say about anyone else's work ever. But in order to discuss these things with a game mechanical lens, we really do need to say, this might not be the best, or this might be problematic. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean we're right. It just means that is what the lens that we're looking through at the moment is showing us. So I wanted to get that out of the way first. And the second, I wanted to mention a tweet that Dan Dillon made a while ago. Dan is a Wizards of the Coast employee, one of their game designers, one of my favorite people in the industry.
Yeah, one of our heroes.
Super smart. He put a tweet out that was not in reply to anything, but it spoke to me, so I wanted to mention it. And I don't have it in front of me, so I'm going to try to remember. But it basically said, it sounds like some people don't want players to be able to do things. And while that was very general, it wasn't talking to any specific topic, it is something to keep in mind as we go through these game design discussions. Because it is important as a game designer to create things for the players to do. Mm-hmm. But that always has to be balanced with, are what we are allowing them to do going to end up be detrimental to the game as a whole? And that's both in terms of just how it works at the table, how it works socially, right? A rule written brilliantly, but that takes 5 minutes to adjudicate, is not something that we're going to want at the table, not because it's too powerful, not because it's not flavorful, but because it just takes a long time. It slows a game down. People might lose interest. So all of these things that we're talking about all come together into those discussions. So yes, we want to let players do new things. We want to let them have fun, but we also need to always temper that with what does the procedure, what does the flow of the game, how has that changed based on this rule?
Yeah. Excellent.
Yep. So with that, I will get right into chapter 1, which is about character creation, lineages, dark gifts, subclasses, and backgrounds. I don't know if we'll get through all of these today.
Well, and I'm thinking we can do it at a little bit of a higher level, so maybe we can do it. But
okay, we'll give it a shot.
The point of this chapter, right, is that it's creating a number of things, and it gives us, as you just mentioned, a whole list of things that we can use so that that horror story we talked about when we were reviewing chapter 4 comes to life from the player side, not just the DM side, right? So you don't show up just playing a clown unless it's a tragic clown or a creepy clown, but you're not going to show up, with like the happy-go-lucky halfling that's fearless, maybe, and expect to contribute to the horror part. But if you come in playing a investigator that went through a lot and sees spirits, well, now we're talking, right? Now we're part of the game. And so this is kind of the player side of how to attain all this, right?
Right. Yeah. So as Teos said in chapter 4, it said to the DM, hey, find out what your players want and what their limits are and what might scare their characters and so on. And this chapter says, hey, players, the DM is probably going to come to you and ask, what do you want and what experiences are you looking for? So here are some things to think about. So the Haunted Heroes is the first little section where there are no rules per se, but they provide for you a list of these questions or concepts to keep in mind as you are creating your character.
And I just want to pause, Shawn, and say that this is, you don't often get this in a D&D book.
True.
And I don't know if that's, folks like Wes Schneider coming in or Amanda Harmon with new ideas, a new view. But this is great. Like this idea of let's really help the players lean into this campaign and provide all this useful advice. Like, I think this is really cool. I really like this.
Right. It's almost like a flip has switched in someone or several someones.
Switch
at
has
Wizards.
flip? Sure.
A flip has switched. Is that what I said?
Mm-hmm.
That, hey, these are also user manuals. So let's take an educational approach to this. And in education, right, you say, this is what you are about to learn. This is why you're about to learn it. Here is what I'm going to teach you. Here is what I have just taught you. This is why I taught you. So, it goes through all those steps, and that's what this does. So right off the bat, we get a bullet list called Habits of Heroes. And it makes the point when planning to play a scary adventure, create a character prepared to be scared. Makes perfect sense. Don't play a horror-based game if you don't want to play a horror-based game.
Right.
So the habits of the heroes are focus on the game, which it means unless you're paying attention, you won't know when the scary parts are coming. You will lose the sense of dread that is supposed to be building up while you're, playing Candy Crush on your phone while the DM is giving a reading of the box text or whatever.
Right.
So keep your focus on the game. Limit comedy. This is a tough one because I think like 75% of D&D games are all about the comedy that happens away from the table. So, put a limit on that. It doesn't mean you can't have any comedy because, grim gallows humor has its place in horror. But if you're constantly cracking jokes and doing your typical Monty Python lines, right, it's pulling away from the mood that you're trying to create. And
and I would say here that's a good point that it could have said here the type of comedy matters, right? Like when it's dry gallows humor, that can work quite well, right? Because it can just give you a little brief moment to reset a scene versus slapstick, right? Like that's where it just takes you out of the scene and the scene has to rebuild to get there. And then we see that in movies, right? Where that's not that there isn't any humor, but the humor is placed in a certain way and it's a certain type of humor so that it works with the rest of the scene.
Yep. Next bullet was player fears versus character fears. And they talked about this in chapter 4 as well, which is people do horror for different reasons. And it's very hard to, in a game, make the player scared and the player might not want to be scared, versus making the character scared, where the player can control the fear and how the character reacts to that fear. So the more you can keep the fear factor in game as opposed to out of game, unless the players want to be terrified, then you can obviously do that, but that's different than running it in the game. Next bullet was consent is a priority. Not surprising, based on what we said in Chapter 4. Get everyone's buy-in, set the limits of what is allowable and what is acceptable in a horror-based game. And once all the players are on board, then you can go ahead and work within those confines. You want to cover a couple of them?
So then it comes know what's too far. And that's always important to know how to address concerns when it gets to be a little too much. It again points to Chapter 4. We get add to your own terror. And this is really great. This is the kind of thing that I'm just, very few horror supplements tell you this. It's your ability to add to it. But we see this if you watch, really capable players doing live streams, whether it's horror or not, they will lean into these things, right? They will expose their own foibles, their own weaknesses for the DM to play off, right? So you can make the situation worse for your character. Oh, well, I'm afraid of spider webs, so walking through here really has me on edge, right? And that creates a neat, even better scene. It heightens the scene from what's already there with this spider web filled corridor or something, right? And you can even say things like, my character will just lose her mind if a skeletal hand comes out between the webs, right? And to just, serving it up for the DM to alley-oop at home. And that's a great thing to do, right? And I think it gives example here that you can say, like, does the creature have hooves, right? Because that's something that really scares me. And the DM can say, oh, yes, it does. Or, oh, no.
Yeah, exactly. So, help create the world around you to make it more terrifying, for sure.
And the last one's really good. Enjoy the struggle. And you shouldn't expect to go through a horrible story unscathed. So knowing that you're going to suffer along the way and sort of enjoying how that goes, right? And that's something that I think applies to many different types too. Like if you're playing Tomb of Annihilation and you know that this is a kind of grinder adventure where you could probably die, then every trap, whether you escape it or not, can be an enjoyable experience because you know that this is what it's about. It's going to present these really tough situations, and you may bite it. So enjoy it while it goes.
Yeah, over the years, I've had players, from first edition on, who said, "Ooh, I want to play Ravenloft or Curse of Strahd or some adventure like that," and I realized right away, just from knowing the player, that they would not enjoy this because they always want to be in control. They want to know exactly what their spell does, and they don't like surprises. They don't like being out of control. If you try to do anything that takes any sort of agency away from them, mechanically or story-wise, they get very upset. And so my answer to them is usually, why don't we play this other game?
Tomb of Horrors is maybe the classic adventure that's most like that, right? Where people say, "Oh, I've heard about this. I want to take my strongest character through it." No, you don't. You want to take a pre-gen.
Yeah, exactly.
And you want to come into it knowing that this is going to be unfair,
right? And
we're going to laugh at how unfair it is, not let it ruin our experience. And then it ends up being a much more enjoyable thing,
right? And the same thing goes for DMs as well. If a DM that wants to run a player versus DM game, and they want to run you through something horror like this, where they get a lot of power, you want to be careful. If you know that they are abusers of that power, this might not be the type of game for them to run you through.
Yeah.
So that's the Haunted Hero section. Anything about that?
No, I think that's good.
Okay. You want to talk about lineages for a moment?
Yeah, so these are 3 lineages that we saw as Unearthed Arcana a while back. The Dhampir, which is a basically lesser vampire type lineage, And all of these are lineages, so they use those new rules where you get to decide what your ability score is. It's not treated like a typical race. And the concept is it sort of explains what you are, and you're no longer, an elf or whatever, but you may have been so in a different time. And so we can get things like, art that shows it's a mix of, it gives a hint as to what they used to be beforehand. The Dhampir is known for its hunger. And you get a table of what your hunger is. So maybe you hunger for dreams or life energy or cerebral spinal fluid.
Like you do.
And then, yeah, as you do. And then we have our origins, where it helps you understand what came before. And I like this a lot because it helps you establish that story, which you really want, right? If you became a vampiric type creature, we want to know why, like what happened, right? And so this helps you think through how it came to be. Was one of your parents a vampire? Did you survive being attacked by one but were forever changed? And so this gives you the idea. And then we get some ideas of what domains of dread they tend to be in. And then we get the actual rules of them. These are pretty similar to what we saw in the past. The sort of interesting part here, I think, is you get spider climb, which is pretty neat.
Yeah.
You don't need to breathe, and you have a bite that deals 1d4 plus con. You have advantage on that attack if you are under half your hit points, and based on your proficiency, you can that number of times per day regain hit points based on the damage you do, or you can get a bonus to your attack roll.
Or you can get a bonus to your attack roll equal to the piercing damage that you did with that bite.
Yep.
Just a reminder, you cannot sneak attack with a bite.
Yeah.
Because it's not a finesse weapon. So, yeah, you don't want your rogue to try to talk you into, I do a D4 plus con plus 66 piercing damage with my bite, and I heal all that. I just did 72 points. It's not a monk
weapon.
Right, it's not a monk weapon. I just did 72 points of damage, so I'm plus 72 on my next attack roll or next ability check. That's not how it works.
That's funny.
So other than that, I'm super happy with the Dhampir, it seems.
I mean, the only thing for me is just story-wise, it's a little interesting of, okay, I'm going to start this tale of investigators on the trail of a werewolf. Cool, I'm half vampire.
Yeah.
There's always that aspect of it.
Right. This, to me, seems more something that might happen along the way than that it does.
And we do get some words in here that talk about how these could be imposed upon you. So it could be that during play, you would gain these and then change yourself to being this, which causes a little bit, I don't think it's a big deal, but it does, sometimes there's a little bit of barrier between how things are written. Mm-hmm. As I was reading these, I was thinking, what if this was a change? Yeah, I don't know that it's super is written to explain that, but it's fine.
Yeah.
But I find that alternative more interesting for a story.
Yeah.
We had the same thing in 4th edition. We had the same kind of, we had the I've died before race. We had the vampire race, all of these, and they'd just be jarring in certain adventures, right? When you're level 1 and it's like a vampire and a returned one, all.
Yeah, walk into a bar.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
we need you to help us with goblins. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we could go and talk about horror itself, and what. For me, horror works best when the people going into the horror are sort of innocent and wide-eyed and scared and overcome that. Right. You could definitely tell a story of people being corrupted, but like Teos says, if you start corrupted, it's sort of it's not horror anymore to me because the people involved in the horror are the horror.
Yeah.
Now, if it happens over the life of the campaign and people are transformed and people gain or lose powers because of it, then it's part of the story and it's part of the ongoing narrative rather than the starting point.
Yep.
So next is the Hexblood. So a hexblood is generally someone who has entered a bargain with a hag to gain their deepest wish, but eventually find themselves transformed because of it. If you get this, there's like the others, there's tables that allow you to roll on it or choose one. But it's similar lines to the damn fear. For some reason, you have been changed. You actually become a fae type creature rather than a humanoid. Looking strictly at the abilities, I think they're fun and flavorful and balanced for the most part. You get dark vision, but one of the big new things is you get something called the eerie token. So as a bonus action, you can essentially shed a piece of yourself and imbue that piece of you, whether it's a flake of skin or a piece of hair, with power. And until you finish a long rest, you have certain abilities with this token. So if you give the token to someone else, as an action, you can send telepathic messages to the creature holding or carrying the token as long as you're within 10 miles of it. And it can be up to 25 words. So you're basically giving them a one-way walkie-talkie.
Yeah, but using a piece of like your nail or something like that.
Right, like pull a toenail off and give it to them, which I think is incredibly creepy and awesome. The second thing you can do is remote viewing. So if you are within 10 miles of your token, you can enter a trance. While you're in that trance for up to 1 minute, or if it ends early because you dismiss it or are incapacitated. During that trance, you can see or hear from the token as if you were located where it is. So while you are using your senses at the token's location, you are blind and deaf to your own surroundings. And when the trance ends, that token is destroyed. So you
and I think this is really cool. I do wish it would clarify, if this nail is in the palm of a hand, is my view obscured? If it's in a bag, and my guess is it's meant to be as if you're standing in this location and not seeing through the token itself. Yeah. So it would be unobstructed of view, but because I could see some DMs sort of just being difficult with it. Yeah. I think the point is for it to be able to see clearly.
Yeah. Well, I suspect. Yeah. If the DM is involved as a storyteller, then they can do all sorts of things with it. Yes, you can't see through it because it's in someone's pocket, but you can hear everything clearly, or just something to make the story work would be cool. Another ability you get as a Hexblood is Hex Magic. You can cast Disguise Self and Hex with this trait. Once you cast either of these spells, you can't cast them again until you finish a long rest. You can use Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma as your spellcasting ability for them. And you can also cast the spells using any spell slots you may have.
And I like, after that, there is this becoming a hag sidebar, and it has a nice kind of piece of lore that hags can undertake a ritual to transform a hexblood they created into a new hag. Yep. Either one of its own kind or that embodies the hexblood's nature. And they have to both consent and sort of go through this long ritual. But I thought that was a kind of interesting piece of lore that could be used, by adventure writers or others.
Yeah, I really like that. I love seeing sidebars like that, where it's not something that's player driven. It's not something that's DM driven. It's, hey, work together and tell a cool story.
Yeah. And I think that consent piece could be removed if you're talking about an NPC, right? The hag could have some special reason why it's doing it to somebody, and now you must save them and stop it, right? And that's where you are heroes able to stop this vile hag doing this thing that should not be done.
Exactly.
So it gives you a lot of, it's an interesting little foothold, a little extra bit of lore. I like it.
Yep. And the final heritage is the Reborn. Death isn't always the end. The Reborn exemplify this, being individuals who have died yet somehow still live. So you could give this to anyone who went through a revivify or raise dead. You could do lots of things with this. Did you have any thoughts on the overall theme?
Well, it's also a great. I don't think they say this, but it's a great excuse to bring back the first player that dies, right? Mm-hmm. Like the first character that dies, not player, don't kill your players, but the first character that dies, offer them that ability to come back as a reborn, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to offer this to characters. And so if they want it, then the player could say, yeah, I want my character to come back as a reborn. And then that can be kind of a cool shock to the rest of the party when you show up again, but now you're changed. I think that's a pretty cool idea.
Yeah, it is. The mechanics of it, deathless nature is the brunt of what you get. So you have advantage on saving throws against disease or being poisoned, and you have resistance to poison damage. You gain advantage on death saving throws. You don't need to eat, drink, or breathe, and you don't need to sleep, and magic can't put you to sleep. You can finish a short rest or a long rest in 4 hours while being conscious the entire time. And the other ability is knowledge from a past life. You temporarily remember glimpses of the past. When you make an ability check that uses a skill, you can roll a d6 immediately after seeing the number that you rolled on the d20 and add that d6 to the check. You can use this feature a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus and then regain all expended uses after a long rest. Those are the two main abilities, the only two abilities of the Reborn, which made me think, I like the theme, and I'm usually the last person to say something is underpowered because I'm always worried about something being overpowered. But when you compare that to the Dampier, that's nothing.
Well, and I forget, is an attack roll also an ability check?
No. Initiative is an ability check, and attack roll is not.
Okay. So then yeah, because you're just boosting skills, which is okay, because it would be really strong if it was affecting attacks. So yeah, it's a bit weak. I mean, and maybe that's the Dampier is a bit strong.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't hate it. It's just if you are a gamer who takes something and you don't want it to be underpowered compared to everyone else, and everyone else is playing a Dampier and you're playing this, it seems to me a little bit on the weak side. But
you know what, where I wouldn't think it's weak is if we had rewritten this to say, if Wizards had said, normally you only become a reborn during play, and it's how you get to come back, right? And so then it's okay if it's a little weaker because, hey, you kind of got a second chance,
right?
The dark powers could sort of return you to life as a reborn. And you don't need any resurrection spell or anything like that. You know, this can just happen if the DM and player so choose. Then it's okay to be a little weaker. Could even be weaker than it is, because it would be sort of a get out of death free card.
Sure.
And then it could also be, well, if you want to start this way, that's of course okay, but we're more so intending it to function this particular way.
Yep. So those were the three lineages. Any thoughts overall on them?
No, I think they're good. It just that what we said before, that they're a little fantastic, and so it just is what it is. And as you said, you want to think through that in a campaign of whether it's okay to be not mundane. Because I agree with you that in my horror games, I tend to think of it as it's good to start mundane, like in a Call of Cthulhu scenario, and then gain powers and knowledge and have it operate like that.
There you go. So your mileage may vary, but that's where we come down on the lineages. Next presented are dark gifts. These dark gifts are intended for starting characters, but characters who don't choose one might be presented with opportunities to gain a dark gift as their stories and circumstances unfold. This, to me, goes right back to the discussion we just finished, which is, do you want to come into the game with this power? I would rather have it be a choice that's made, a temptation that's made, rather than having it right from the start. And it's cool to have secrets. It's cool to have role-playing hooks. You don't always have to add mechanics to those.
Yeah, I was very surprised to read this because I would have liked to have seen it written in almost the reverse, which is that in a rare exception, you might think to start this way. But in that case, think through why this makes sense, right? But normally, the whole point of this dark bargain is that it's an offer that you can refuse,
right?
And that there's that danger to it. other thing that we'll see in these is that the way they work, because these things began in the Ravenloft 5e Curse of Strahd adventure. In the Amber Temple, there are these encased dark beings that are sort of they're figments that are captured of the remains of some vast power that are locked in amber. And they offer these gifts, and they don't exactly tell you much about them at all. And so you are really taking a chance. And some of them are stronger than others. They're not necessarily balanced, but that's okay because the whole point is you don't know what you're getting. In this version of the rules, the way I read it is that you are supposed to know. It says the particulars of the dark gift and how it will affect the character must be clear to a player before they choose whether or not to accept. Mm-hmm. And that's where I understand that we are trying to honor the player and not like ruin their character, but I don't know that it becomes then often it's going to be a choice around power gaming and fit, mechanics and things like that rather than story. And especially if you're going to start with it, then it's literally like choose a build option, right? And I don't like that.
Yeah. I mean, if horror takes the power out of the player's hands and makes them react to it, telling everyone what the dark gift is literally, as Teos says, just a way to add some more power to your character or not. So it's in that sense, then you want them to be balanced, and these definitely are not against each other. As I'm about to discuss.
Yeah. And when I first read the first couple, the first two, I think have the exact same sort of structure and how they operate, with like when a sort of the quote unquote bad thing happens. And so I was like, oh, okay, they all use a formula. So we always are building against this formula. That makes it easy to compare them. But then quickly I realized, oh, the other ones don't use the exact same formula. They're very different formulas. And while I like that there's freedom in the design, what that means is, especially when you let characters choose, they are going to choose the ones that fit to their class, because classes are so different and play styles are so different. And when you add that to that, the bonuses can be things that you can optimize. It becomes a little dangerous. And what I liked about the ones in Curse of Strahd is that you generally were not going to optimize this, and neither was it going to be possible to optimize it, nor is it the kind of thing you would optimize. These, you can't say that about.
Yeah, it's true. Let's give two examples. So the very first one mentioned, the very first dark gift mentioned, is Echoing Soul. So your soul isn't your own. At least it wasn't always yours. So with this, you essentially have another soul inside you, or you are this other soul.
And I just want to say, this is another example of where the write-up, to me, speaks to somebody that is being generated with this power rather than gained it, which I think should in theory be the more common thing to happen.
Right.
Because then I would write this, text would all be written differently to say, a dark power gave you this bargain. The moment you accept it, you feel another you out there.
Right.
And instead it's like, hey, your soul isn't your own, or it wasn't always well, that's like a past tense thing that you've always dealt with. It's just
right. Yeah. It does, and it does make a huge difference in the character and the campaign. Yeah. So, that's a big difference. Mechanically, though, the Echoing Soul, what does it give you? Well, it gives you two skills that you become proficient in, and one additional language. Okay, not overpowered, but okay. What's the downside? The downside is called intrusive echoes. When you roll a 1 on an attack roll, and I think saving, is it more than that?
Ability check or save. Yeah.
So when you roll a 1 on any of those things, you roll a d6 and something happens. 1 through 5 are bad, and very bad, as in like you become incapacitated. You're blinded. You are frightened. You become charmed by a creature. On a 6, though, you get to re-roll that 1. Yeah. So that's a lot of bad potentially happening.
And honestly, in the right campaign, I think this is totally cool.
Absolutely.
It is a little rough, but if you're happy with your character, if you see this as a horror game the way one does at Call of Cthulhu, where generally you either go insane and are become controlled by the DM, or you die.
Yeah.
And those are the usual outcomes. Very rarely does one win in Call of Cthulhu. If you think of it more like that kind of a game, then these are fantastic, right?
Yeah, yeah, and you can really lean into them, and it's a good negative to offset some positive possibilities. Okay, cool. And then as you go down through, there's one called Touch of Death. I was like, okay, let me see what this does. So your touch is pain, harming whoever you come into contact with. The deathly power within you is beyond your control, afflicting any who touch your bare skin. By the same token, you can deliver death to your enemies with your touch. And I'm like, okay, this is potentially cool. Let's see what the positives and negatives are. So I go down to the three things it gives you. The first is called Death Touch. As an action, make one unarmed strike. On a hit, your target takes an additional 1d10 necrotic damage, and that increases at 5th, 11th, and 17th. So by 17th level, your unarmed strike is doing 4d10 additional damage plus your unarmed strike, which is probably not much unless you're a monk. Now, if you take this as a monk, even at first level, you're doing, with your unarmed strikes, an additional 1d10 damage every time you hit.
Yeah, now it does seem to be only if you do this action, the Death Touch action, but you could still then do your normal attacks as, say, like a bonus action afterwards, or it's still strong, right?
Yeah, yeah. So it's a thing, and so I'm like, wow, that's really powerful. What's going to offset this? Second is when you hit a target, is inescapable death. When you hit a target with an attack roll and deal necrotic damage, you ignore the target's resistance to that damage. All right, so now you're punching undead and doing necrotic damage. Okay, that's not as powerful, but in Ravenloft that is. Right, that's powerful in Ravenloft, where there's lots of undead, lots of things with immunity or resistance to necrotic damage. All right, so this last thing must be the big negative.
Oh, yeah, here it comes.
Withering Contact. When you start your turn grappling a creature or grappled by it, the creature takes 1d10 necrotic damage. I'm like, wait a second. And so I'm scrolling down. I'm like, where's the negative? There is none.
I wonder if they forgot it somehow.
Yeah, I don't know. But so as the DM, you can say, well, anytime you touch someone, that's bad. But there's no mechanics to it. And so all the player has to say was, well, I always wear gloves. Or I always have all my skin covered. And then any sort of negative that might come from that is sort of hand-waved.
And the wording seems to be that you're focusing your deadly touch. So you're deliberately causing damage, and maybe someone touching you, nothing here says that touching you actually causes damage. It might just feel terrible. Right. Yeah, there's no drawback whatsoever, right? Which is really, really interesting. Yeah.
So when you have those two, extremes of dark gifts, it sort of flies in the face of what I thought they should be, which is you're trading a positive for a negative. It'll be a wash in the long run and tell a cool story with. And this death touch, touch of death isn't even the coolest story that could be told. No. Right.
And there are a number of options here that don't seem balanced, and I don't quite understand the approach. So Voices from Beyond, for example, has it's living, whispering, Gathered Whispers. That's the name of it, Gathered Whispers. When you have Gathered Whispers, the sort of negative mechanic to it is a D4 table, whereas the first one we talked about had a D6 table. And so in this case, 1 out of 4 times you're getting the positive result, which is to be able to cast an augury spell within the next 10 minutes for free. And I don't, that's a 1 out of 4 positive, and the negatives are not quite as bad as the ones for the other one. And so it's just sort of like, well, and especially if you let characters choose or deny them, your monk is just going to deny everything until they get the necrotic one.
Right.
No, Dark Power, I say no to that. But if you offer me another one,
right.
Maybe.
Touch of Death, that I'd take.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
interesting. But and what I would say here to DMs is take a look at these, play with them, bring them in the way that makes sense for you and your players. That it's going to be fun. Don't just be wedded to this design here, because it's a little. I don't quite understand it.
Yeah. So next, we still have the 2 subclasses and the backgrounds to go through. Shall we do this next time?
It's up to you, Shawn. We could also just really lightly go over the subclasses. It's up to you.
Okay. Well, let's do it then.
Okay.
Let's do it. The first subclass is called Bard College of Spirits. You are in touch with spirits, and they speak to you through tales of things they've seen and allow you to use that knowledge for your own good.
Yeah, it's something right off the bat that hit me here, because I've seen this a couple of times. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. It says you can use the following objects as a spellcasting focus for your bard spells: a candle, crystal ball, skull, spirit board, or Taroka deck. It doesn't say I start with those.
True.
So do I have to buy those? What does a crystal ball cost?
Yeah.
What does So it's just, I wish it would have just said, and you start with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, everybody has a skull, right? So there you go.
I use my own skull.
I use my own skull.
Yeah.
Why not? So what are some of the things? Level 3, you get Guiding Whispers. You learn the Guidance cantrip, and it doesn't count against your Bard cantrips. And you can do it at 60 feet rather than a touch spell. Level 3, you also get Spiritual Focus. That's the using those objects that Teos mentioned. And starting at 6th level, when you cast a Bard spell.
And can I just say here, this mechanic is very interesting, the Tales from Beyond piece, because you spend a bonus action and a bardic inspiration, and you roll on this table.
Mm-hmm.
Now this table is kind of active, and it's yours until you take a short or long rest. You can then use an action and choose a target within 30 to then impose the tale upon that creature. So it's sort of a weird amount of optimization that it's kind of entailed. Yep. And I understand what it's trying to do mechanically, that it can be either negative or positive, and so then you enact it. But it also then lasts a certain amount of time depending, it lasts until it is used. Sometimes it has additional duration. So it's a little bit weird in how it tries to handle so much with this mechanic. And I'm curious as to how this will play at the table using it. It also is possible that people would want to redo it outside of play. So sort of roll it. It's bound by your bardic inspirations, but it may be important enough that someone sort of does it before combat ever begins, and then goes, I don't like it. I'm going to spend another bard inspiration. Oh, that's the one I want. It gives 2 people temporary hit points or something like that. Yeah. And then in combat, you activate it.
Yeah, it is a several step process that can, again, be time draining as you roll this die, roll that die. Who do I give it to? What's the best option? It's a positive one. Oh, I'll give it to this player. Oh, it's a negative one. Well, I'm going to save it maybe because the next monster we fight we know is going to be this sort of creature. It's a little more involved than the here, take this die fighter and make sure you hit. So yeah, I don't hate it. There are several steps in the process.
I also think in general, most of the options are stronger than bardic inspiration.
Yeah.
Which is a bit of a thing. And bardic inspiration was sort of the iconic bard thing, maybe. Mm-hmm. And I feel like a lot of the bardic subclasses undermine that a bit.
Yeah. Now, if you're into like rolling the random craziness and seeing what happened, this is if you're wielding the Wand of Wonder, level 6, that's what we just talked about. Spirit session, right?
Yeah, you can do the channeling spirits.
Okay.
And they can give you a spell of any class that you learn that has to be based on how many people are part of the ritual, which doesn't seem to matter because you do it during a short or long rest. Mm-hmm. It's a way to get a spell that you need. Some flexibility, kind of cool.
Sure. Level 14, Mystical Connection. Whenever you roll on that spirit table we just talked about, you can roll the die twice and then choose the effects to bestow of the choices you rolled. If you roll the same number on both dice, you ignore the number and then choose any effect on the table. Mm-hmm. This is weird because, as you might expect, the higher numbers are more powerful because you won't be able to roll a 12 unless you're rolling a d12 as your bardic die. But if you're only rolling a d6, well, yeah, you have to get to 14th level before you can do that. Never mind. I talked myself out of that point. But anyway, it's if you do roll the same number on both dice, then it becomes a look through this laundry list of things, which one's best. And then everyone in the party, if you have, kibitzing players are like, oh no, choose number 7 because you can. Oh, but if you choose number 8 and do it on me, then it becomes a whole thing. If you're into tactical play, great. If you're not, it becomes a sort of a time sink. Whew. So that was. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, the College of Spirits. I was going to say Warlock the Undead. To me, the thing that I want to talk about with this one is the fact that right off the bat at level 1, it makes you immune to the frightened condition. Why would we do that for a horror campaign?
Yes. That was my thought as well.
I can't see anything past that. I get to this and I go, why is this in this book? And I understand it somewhat thematically because you're all about the undead and your patron is something like, I don't know, a Sararak or Vecna or something like that. But why would you make you immune? There's another piece that I don't like, which is around necrotic damage. But just this one, immune to the frightened condition. I would recommend that if you're going to run a horror campaign, change that. Give advantage on saving throws, maybe against something that would cause frightened or something like that, because you're a little more hardened. But yeah.
Yeah, and it's the same thing. Well, it's the same discussion we've been having. You have to choose this at first level because it's a Warlock pact. If you're going in as a lover of the undead, is this really a horror campaign for you, or is this the best thing ever? It loses the horror effect to me, and this just becomes sort of a grimdark. We're living in this horror realm and we're all about it. So overall, it doesn't, I understand why it's there. This is a great one for NPCs. I want to see monsters like this, not player characters like this in a horror.
The other thing that's interesting about this one is it has this ability to do a spirit projection later on. And that always is a sort of weird, you have to store your body somewhere. And it's vulnerable while you stash it. The good thing is when it ends, and you get benefits for going into this sort of spirit form, sort of an astral form type thing. But at the end of it, then you can either go to the body or your body comes to you. So that's good. So no one can kidnap your body. But your body could be hurt if someone stumbled upon it. I'm always, that interaction worries me for proper play. Yep.
I do like this idea of transforming. So the first level thing is Form of Dread. As a bonus action for 1 minute, you transform, and then you gain these benefits for the minute. I like these sorts of subclasses because it's sort of like the Barbarian Rage, but for me, it's even more. It's nicer for players that like to play in 2 different modes. Right? I'm a Warlock, so I'm going to stay back and I'm going to shoot things with my death rays. Oh, but something's in my face. I'm going to go into this mode. The play is going to be different, but I still enjoy it. And so I can go back and forth between these 2 different modes. I like those because they let the player that wants to do it, and the rest of the players don't need to worry about it. But just as we mentioned, the sort of flavor of it fitting into a horror campaign doesn't jive with me.
Yeah, and it is limited by your proficiency bonus number of times, but it's still it's that kind of thing. If it's temporary hit points and you can give off frightened and you're immune to frightened, I don't love the choice of what it's doing. Yeah, but I do like the idea of the transformations. So interesting.
Yeah. And then backgrounds. I'll let you cover this. Bring us home.
One thing I think is super cool about these backgrounds is the first thing. I don't think any book has done this before. It gives us general background features, and we get 5 new features. These are not backgrounds, but the features of a background that can replace the feature you got in an existing background. So you might be the soldier or the noble or any of those other typical backgrounds, and you can now swap in the feature. And the features are Inheritor, where you are related to somebody important that might be recognized, and people might see you as hero or villain as a result. Mist Wanderer, where the mists whisper to you, and you can recognize a mist talisman that allows travel through the mists by touch. Spirit Medium, you can serve as a conduit for spirits. You begin with a custom device. Some of this is a little weird. It's not entirely clear to me. If I use a cup for tea leaves, what can I do with that? It doesn't really tell me, but it is some sort of device, and I get to add my proficiency bonus to checks with them, whatever those checks may be. If it's a Taruka deck or spirit board you choose, then it's a little clearer.
All right. So I like that. I like that idea.
Yeah. And Trauma Survivor is you've suffered a terrible event. You can convince sympathetic doctors or others to shelter you. And Traveler, you come from another land. This one's a little strange in that usually I think we come to Ravenloft from what we consider the normal world, right. Forgotten Realms or something like that. And so the idea that you will... You come from another land somehow differently than everybody else, in a way that other people who are from other lands and are like refugees or travelers sense it and want to give you shelter, but not the rest of the party who comes from another land, but not another land. A
different other land. Okay, yeah.
Okay, yeah, that one's a little... It
is a little... Doesn't make a heck of sense, yeah.
But I love the concept of swapping out like your noble benefit to be... an inheritor. Is super cool. And they add later in a sidebar this idea that if you've played like Curse of Strahd with your group before, this could be that you are an inheritor of something that character gained. Mm-hmm. And so you can establish a legacy, or if you run another Ravenloft adventure, you can link characters this way, which is, I think, a really neat idea.
That is.
Then we get our horror characteristics. So if you're familiar with the background process, you go through all these personality traits and ideals and bonds and all that. So we get new tables to replace those. Super cool idea. Mm-hmm. So that you can roll on these instead of whatever you normally would for your background. I think that's super cool. And there are some fun ones in these that, again, will lead to better horror games. Super cool concept. And then we actually get 2 new backgrounds. One is called Haunted One. You are haunted by something terrible. You get 2 skills, 2 languages, equipment that kind of fits a Monster Hunter type person. It's kind of a neat little set there. Monster Hunters pack. And then you get to roll on the harrowing event that led to being haunted. And we've seen this a lot in this chapter, which I really like. It gives you concepts for why you ended up here. And so this is, again, really good stuff. You opened an Eldritch Tome, saw things you shouldn't have, and they're burned into your psyche. It's what every parent warned us about. Mm-hmm. We're all haunted once, yes, according to our parents. And then the feature is Heart of Darkness, which is common folk can sense what you're going through and will help you, even taking arms for you, which I thought was pretty unusual for a feature. Investigator, great idea, right? Just fits so perfectly. You seek the truth. This is just, it felt like X-Files, every word I read. Right. You're seeking clues and answers. You get 2 skill proficiencies, the Disguise Kit and Thieves' Tools proficiency, and then a few equipment items. A table gives you information on the first case you had, which started you on your path. I love that. And then the feature is Official Inquiry. You gain access to a place or individual related to your investigation. And I love they say law enforcement has opinions on you. They may help or hinder you. So they, it's sort of just like Mulder and Scully, right? Like they may think that they need to help you on the side, or they may be like, oh, here come these people with their completely off the wall ideas. Let's get in their way and be obstructive.
Great. Yeah. When I played Curse of Strahd, I played a moldy sculler. That was the name of the character, Moldy Sculler. A combination of those two as a total investigator, but skeptical at first, and then realize what was going on. So this fit. Awesome. I wish that had been around then because it would have fit perfectly.
Yeah, that's great. And the last thing is a table of 100 horror trinkets that you might have started with, which I think is really perfect for this kind of a setting, right? Mm-hmm. It's neat. I think that the great use of trinkets that then can be used by the DM in some way.
There you go. So that was chapter 1.
Yeah, overall pretty strong, right? I thought it was, we have our little bones to pick as designers, just as anyone would have anything we created. But overall, I feel like this is interesting developments in how chapter 1 is done for this kind of book.
Yep. The biggest question is not what's there, but how you use what's there.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you let it happen as the campaign continues, or if you start right off allowing the players to be these things. That's what you have to grapple with as the DM. All right. Well, thank you, Teos, for sharing your expertise with us as always. And thank you, listeners, and thank you to our patrons. If you like the show, please consider becoming a patron. You can go to patreon.com/MMP to become a patron. Teos, where can people find you on social media?
You can find my blog at alphastream.org, where you can subscribe and keep up to date. You'll also get something free. And you can find me on Twitter at AlphaStream. How about you, Shawn?
You can find me on Twitter at Shawn Merwin, or you can go to the forums at forums.misdirectedmark.com to give us your thoughts and questions. You can also follow the podcast on Twitter at Mastering D&D. Mastering Dungeons is a Misdirected Mark production, the media arm of Encoded Designs. So, Teos, now that we have braved the PCs of Chapter 1, what are we going to do now?
We're going to get ready to kill some monsters in a domain of dread of our own creation,
which is coming up next.